Hi, everybody. I'm Bob Bowman, Editor-in-Chief of Supply Chain Brain. Welcome to this special presentation, Future-Proof Your Warehouse, How Low-Code Platforms Unlock Warehouse Agility, presented by Tecsys. Quick reminder, there will be an audience question and answer session at the end of this presentation. Audience members are encouraged to submit their questions at any time during the presentation by clicking on that Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Now, there's a saying that markets hate uncertainty because it adds financial risk. The same goes for your warehouse. Warehouses today are subject to a slew of operational challenges, including labor shortages, inflation, and a variety of supply chain disruptions. But while you can't control external factors, you can improve warehouse agility. The key is low-code application platforms, or LCAPs. A warehouse management system built on an LCAP lets you make fast, scalable updates so your warehouse can stay responsive without the delays and costs of traditional development. So today, we're going to hear from experts from Tecsys, the Mayo Clinic, and RiseNow to discuss how LCAPs can drive continuous improvement. With that, I want to introduce our speakers for today. David Machito is Senior Manager, Product Marketing with Tecsys. With over 10 years of experience in B2B logistics and business improvement, David specializes in optimizing supply chain operations and enhancing customer experiences. His expertise spans freight forwarding and trade compliance to retail and e-commerce fulfillment and wholesale distribution. He's an expert in order management, warehouse management, store inventory management, and warehouse automation. Ben Sparks is a performance consulting analyst at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. Ben has 14 years of supply chain management experience that includes working in a warehouse, procurement, demand planning, analytics, and system administration. Ben's team is responsible for administering supply chain management operational systems for the enterprise. Such systems include distributed order management, warehouse management, package tracking, and point-of-use inventory systems. And Bill Myers is Senior Director with RiseNow. Bill brings over 25 years of supply chain expertise, 21 of them dedicated to healthcare supply chain transformation through Tecsys' suite of WMS, supply chain management, and demand management technology. As a consultant for Tecsys, Bill has collaborated with leading organizations, including Piedmont Health, Orlando Health, North Mississippi Health Services, McKesson, and Health and Human Services. Welcome, everybody, to our panel. Great to have everybody here. Let me start with you, David. I want to ask you before we get deeper into the discussion. Let's give our audience some background on low-code tools and low-code platforms. Let's start with just what is low-code development?
Thanks, Bob. So low-code development is actually an approach to adapting existing functionality, extending an application, building an application within an existing software package or an existing software. But the key is without modifying the underlying source code. So the way it does that is it comes with a toolkit or a toolbox. For example, configurable logic, rules engines, drop-down menus, expression columns. Sometimes there might even be drag and drop type of functionality you can use, and with minimal hand coding. So what it does is it enables you to do this without actually modifying the code and without actually writing code yourself.
Mm-hmm. So you don't need an army of skilled coders necessarily in order to achieve your goals. Sounds great, but let's talk about the platform approach, David, and what exactly is a low-code platform, and how does that relate to supply chain software?
So, I'll just say that a low-code application platform, as you mentioned in LCAP, it's not necessarily a new technology. It's been around for over a decade. And what it is essentially a software platform that enables you to do rapid development with providing like I mentioned earlier, a toolkit to be able to do that. So there are essentially three core deployments of a low-code application platform. So I'm kind of giving an LCAP 101 here. But so the first deployment, which is very light, is a software, and this doesn't have to be a warehouse management system, it could be any software, but it's a software with low-code capability. So for example, you can go in there and build a dashboard. That's kind of the extent of what it does. Then what you'll have, if you kind of Google low-code application platforms, what you'll see are standalone low-code application platforms, standalone LCAPs. And those are systems that you actually integrate to an existing software package. They integrate using APIs, and it enables you to customize the software without, once again, modifying the source code, the underlying code. And then the third kind is an embedded low-code application platform. So an embedded low-code application platform is actually built into the software package. The toolkit, the tools, they're all part of the software. You don't have to integrate to them. They're not extra to the software. You basically go in there and you're able to make your customizations. And I'm just gonna preface it by saying, I say customization. They can be called modifications too. But when we talk modifications, I talk more about code mods, where when I say customizations, I tend to talk about low-code application platform type of work. So that it's kind of just semantics, but just to keep things clear. But essentially, that's what it is. So an embedded platform, what it enables us to do is be more granular, because it's actually in the metadata that you're making those customizations, and it should be in our case, it is upgradable.
So you have this local control, but can the software still be in the cloud? Can it still be hosted offsite?
Yes, definitely. So it's a SaaS platform that you're able to customize, and the customization is done by what we call citizen developers.
Well, let's talk more about that. It's an interesting phrase, this term citizen developer, and we've got a couple of them here, right, to help us out today. Just what is a citizen developer, and how do they differ from software developers?
Okay, so if you search what a citizen developer is, they'll say they're a business user, and that's not part of IT. I'm not gonna subscribe to that definition, because they could be in IT, but they're just not programmers. So we all know what software programmers, we all know what they do. They build software from scratch. They build architecture, they code in a language, they write lines of code. A citizen developer uses the configurable tools and rule-based logic to do this. So they're not actually writing code, they're not building stuff from scratch, they're customizing, they're adapting, they're extending what already exists. And so what you can do as a citizen developer, as a business user, as we'll see in a few minutes, because you know the process so well, there's a difference between having to write, for example, business requirements, and then give them to the IT team, and then have them figure out what you're actually trying to do, and then have them build it. You can do it yourself. So the time to market is much quicker, and it takes a lot of the pressure off of IT. But once again, an IT person can be a citizen developer. They're just not a programmer. And a programmer is very specialized. A citizen developer doesn't have to be. So you can have multiple citizen developers across the organization, whether it's supply chain operations, HR, finance, and of course in IT as well.
Okay, well, again, we've got a couple citizen developers here to help us understand what they do and how do they fit into the organization. Let's start with Ben Sparks over at the Mayo Clinic. Ben, tell us a little bit about yourself and your organization and what you're doing over there.
Hey, good morning. Thanks for having me. So I serve as an analyst on a team here at Mayo Clinic called Process and System Solutions. So we are responsible for the system administration for operational applications that are, really responsible for moving product from end to end, right? So from clinical point of use, surgery point of use, all the way through our ERP system and into our warehouse management system, Tecsys, and also our external package tracking system. So really, we're responsible for making sure that the users who are going to be into those systems are added with the correct permissions, correct roles. We're also the conduit for making sure that orders are getting from end to end, right? So as you can imagine, as a supply chain professional, there's an extraordinary amount of work that occurs behind the scenes to have the product delivered, on time to where it needs to be, right? So we're the ones for monitoring the end to end and making sure that orders are getting to the warehouse on time, shipping results are getting back. So basically, from point of use all the way to the warehouse, and then from warehouse all the way back to point of use to make sure that those orders close. The other piece that our team is responsible for, we are the warehousing experts for supply chain management here at the Mayo Clinic. So we're responsible for a good chunk of the process improvement and overall system processes that are responsible for getting those orders physically and electronically from A to B and back. So that's a little bit.
Yeah, and I'd just like to add to what Ben said, maybe for some of the viewers. So, Ben is from Mayo Clinic, and when we talk about hospital point of use, what they're doing is getting supplies from a warehouse and getting it into an operating room or an emergency room for the doctors and surgeons to be using or the nurses to be using. So it's that supply chain that happens, from the hospital warehouse and goes all the way to patient care. And the other thing I just wanted to mention too is, Ben made a good point about governance and security. The IT team does have an important role to play in citizen development, is making sure that the right people have access and they're making the right changes without causing disruption. So there is controls. It's not a free for all where anybody can just go and start changing things in the system. There is control.
Well, correct. And one of the biggest things I wanted to mention too that I forgot is my claim to fame is I'm not IT, right? So I'm very much a supply chain professional, very closely tied, David, to what you were talking about earlier of, close to the operation, understands what's going on, right? Like, just want to make that clear. Very much not an IT professional, supply chain operations guy.
And is a true citizen developer.
And really, it's a low-code platform that makes it possible for you to do what you do without being IT. That's very interesting. Yeah, it also goes without saying that in the healthcare business, boy, your warehouse management system and your order management system, they have to get it right. There's no margin of error there. Highly regulated, critical materials needed all the time. And so I really love having this discussion with both you guys about that. But with that in mind, I want to turn over to Bill Myers. I would like you to tell us a little bit about your background, Bill, and also something about RiseNow. Who is RiseNow?
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me. I guess the easiest way to start is when I started, I feel like in this business, I had hair on top of my head and the hair that was on my face was not white. My background goes from the operational side of the business. As you mentioned, I worked a little bit as a consultant for Tecsys, went back to the IT side of the business and came 7 years ago to RiseNow. I'm in a position now where I'm just blessed to have a wonderful team that I get to work with and lead that support implementations on the warehouse management platform as well as some of the other modules within Tecsys, to include the SCM module, the point of use module, the delivery management module, the new receiving app, and some other spaces. And we work in that space as an implementer on new installs. We help out with optimizations with clients who have the technology already in place and looking to expand it. Very much what this conversation is about, right? How do I get the most out of what I've got? But we also play outside the space of Tecsys in advisory and optimization from an organizational standpoint. And again, I think you'll find that the members of my team have a similar, probably a little bit more color on their face, but the story is much the same, coming from an operational or an IT or a mixed background along those lines.
Well, Bill, when you look in the mirror, do you see an IT guy looking back, or how do you describe yourself from this standpoint?
I think, Ben, correct me if I'm wrong here. I think you'd be in the same situation. It depends. I think you find yourself being a bit of a chameleon from conversation to conversation. Am I operations? Am I IT?
Correct. We like to consider ourselves the liaison between the operation directly to IT. So rather than having the staff on the floor, put in tickets to Mayo IT, they're routing most of their concerns through us, and then we're responsible for either escalating to IT or solving the problem with our capability.
Yeah, but you guys are in the trenches, so to speak. You're right there in terms of your everyday operations. You're not sequestered off in like some office where these IT guys are sealed up and maybe nobody ever talks to them. I like the way that's a perfect way of describing it. David, is that your understanding? I mean, this is generally the role of a citizen developer in a larger sense. Do others have the similar things to say about it?
Yeah, exactly. So it basically empowers the team that's doing the citizen development to do it themselves. And taking like I said, the pressure off of IT, and it helps you just do it faster.
Yeah.
So that is essentially what the true definition of a citizen developer is: a business user. And we say that if you're in a project, there's the business and then there's IT. So they're a business user, but of course the lines get blurred.
Sure.
Especially as a systems integrator, you're kind of as Bill is in RiseNow, you're kind of in the middle of helping them do the optimization, but also getting the software, ready to where it needs to be. So like Ben said, like a liaison. So you're kind of sitting in the middle. But at the end of the day, your advantage is your knowledge of the operation.
You describe the relationship with IT in a positive way, saying that it takes pressure off of IT, but do you also need to like look at the possibility of IT feeling like people are stepping on their territory by being these so-called citizen developers, and how do you deal with that?
Well, what I would say is if you can help them, so what I would say is you work alongside it. You're not cutting them out of the actual process, and you have to work alongside them because IT is ultimately responsible for the software. IT is ultimately responsible for it being up and running, making sure it doesn't crash, making sure that the upgrades work, all that kind of stuff. So you can't just do things in a vacuum. But what it does, I would say it's an IT partnership. It's not taking over their job, it's partnering with them. And I would say that that's probably welcomed, as opposed to, here's what I need, go build it for me and call me when it's ready.
Right. Well, let's talk about how this really works in the real world. Bill, maybe you can describe to us briefly how you have actually used an LCAP or a low-code platform in your line of business.
Yeah, so actually, if I go back, David, you kind of talked about the expression columns, custom tables, custom columns, right? And there's a myriad of things that we call out there just natively there as one-offs that you can jump into, make a quick or relatively quick impact on the business. But my personal opinion is I think where the power comes in is combining them with each other, right? So doing an expression column that joins up with a rule that does a thing. And then from beyond that, if you look at generally what's available within the application itself, right? Without getting into the weeds, we know we have timers, we have task views and some other stuff out there. And so being able to tie those things that you're doing development-wise into the natural framework of the application makes some solutions that are pretty darn robust to extend really the WMS to something that's unique to your organization, your operation, a requirement, whether it be reporting or to drive efficiency. So instead of me just kind of droning on and getting on my sandbox, because this is the stuff that's really, it gets fun. It gets really fun. To give you some examples, which is your question, we've worked with, I'll give you just a couple here. We've worked with some clients that needed to have an ad hoc auditing function. And even though there's a function that's similar to it already in the application, their needs were so different that they wanted to create this thing. And that was a combination of custom tables, columns, expression columns, workflow changes, and I'll stop there. But just again, to paint the picture that oftentimes the real money, right, the squeezing, the turnip comes from combining it. Other things we've done are some notifications via email based off of certain activities or tasks that take place, making unique labels, right? Some of our clients have unique requirements because of their customer base or their operational surrounding, and they don't want to have to go and manually create a Word document to print a PDF to this thing and hopefully tie it to a Zebra printer. Well, crud, you got this application that's already tied in some pretty darn robust label printing. Why don't I just create something custom with it and capitalize on what I have? So another great example there. Business process validations and really speed of access. I'm going to generalize this one instead of giving a specific speed of access to data, right? So oftentimes, if we think of any of the softwares we have ever used, I have this data element that lives over here, a data element that lives over here, but my decision really considers those two plus three other factors. So I can create this wonderful report and then get the report and work the report and then make decisions, or I could just combine them all and have them show up on screen. And by the way, build the opportunity to impact based off of data right there on that same screen. So I'm not running this report, analyzing the report, coming back to the application and making changes. So those are some quick rundowns that come off the top of my head of some of the things that we've jumped in with our client community and helped them to build for themselves or build for them.
Interesting. I mean, you talk about what you're doing. Sounds like you're heading off the danger of data being siloed in various parts of the organization where people aren't talking to each other. It seems that the very nature of your work suggests that you have access to data across the organization, and that's sounds like a really good thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ben, what about you? Give me an example where you developed on the platform what for one of your customers. What have you done?
So I actually have two examples that I want to walk through.
Okay.
The first of which is, I'll give you a little bit of background of an operational thing here at Mayo Clinic that we are looking to improve. So we ship a vast majority, a lot of our products out of the warehouse in totes, right? The totes are palletized, they're wrapped, they're sent downtown for distribution. So a team who picks into the container is not the same team who is responsible for grabbing the inventory out of the container and placing it into point of use, right? So imagine handing it off and, the distribution team opening the tote and having questions about what is actually in the tote, right? From, items they don't recognize, manufacturer numbers, substitute items, etc. Oftentimes they wanted a solution to say, what does Tecsys say is in this container and how many of which are in the container? At the MIC, the Mayo Inventory Center, we used to print off a 4x6 CPL for every single container that left the warehouse, right? So imagine, on a night we're shipping, I'll just make a number up, 1,000 totes, which is probably pretty close. That's 1,000 4x6 labels with container information about the contents that's in the container for another operational team to use, right? So imagine coming in and looking on the outside of that and thinking, wow, there's got to be a better way to do this. There's got to be a better way to provide them the information that they need to do their jobs, but also not to hinder this other operation to print off thousands of labels and make sure they're fixed and they match up, right? You can imagine with a physical, we call them container packing list, ending up in the wrong tote, mass confusion on the other end, right, of delivery address and the contents of the container. So the example that I have is actually a good mix of where the citizen developer starts and stops, right? So in Tecsys, we were able to create a view, right, a customized view of the contents of those containers, and we were able to generate a WSDL. For those of you who are familiar with using APIs, we were generate a WSDL document, and we're also able to generate the SOAP information that our actual IT team was able to use to get the API connected. So what I had asked our IT team to do was develop a application or a website, whatever, that was able to reach into Tecsys and look at the contents of a container given a warehouse in a specific container number, right? So The solution end to end looks a little bit like this. The website doesn't require any user administration, doesn't require me to give people access. It's a Google app that just pulls up on any device that's on the Mayo network. If I type in a container number and a warehouse, it will produce what the inventory center shipped out of that warehouse. The citizen developer part says I can create an expression column. To Bill's point about labels, I can create an expression column that embeds that URL from the website with variables for the warehouse and the container, and I can put that on a QR label and I can print that. So a solution where I was forced to print off paper, physically match up the contents of the container packing list for each container. Now every container label that leaves the warehouse has a little QR. It's not live yet, but it's where we're going, right? The vision. Every container that leaves the warehouse has a QR code in the bottom corner of it. So if a distribution person has questions about what's in this container, they already have the device with them, and they're able to scan the device, pull up the website, and they're able to see like, oh, wow, okay, manufacturer number, substitute item. Here's the Oracle shipment that, or the Oracle PO that this container is tied to. So if they have questions, they're screenshotting the container website. They're using that attachment right off their tablet to submit a ServiceNow ticket if they've got any questions or if they have any concerns, right? So one aspect where I took an old school paper solution and was able to digitize it and essentially give it out to the masses.
You say that paper sometimes comes into the picture, but for the most part, it is digitized now.
It is digitized, but we still send out, just like your FedEx and UPS label, we still affix a label to every container that leaves the warehouse so that distribution team knows where to deliver it. Yeah.
Wow. I have to, it's hard. I'm sorry, go on. Do you want to say something, Dave?
Yeah. So just for Ben and Bill, like I find sometimes it's easier, or maybe you could comment on this. It's easier to actually change software than it is to change people or change processes in a warehouse. So I don't know if you want to comment on that, but it seems like everything's very technical, but sometimes that tribal knowledge is there and the process there, and it's like just you have to adapt the software. Unfortunately, I don't know if you could comment on that.
Yeah, Ben, if you don't mind, I'll hit it first.
Yeah,
please do.
Yeah, so my experience, you're so spot on. We want to come in and we want to say, well, this new technology or our technology recommends that this is the order of events and you're doing something different. You must conform. But in reality, oftentimes, if you simply ask the question, why are you doing what you're doing to the operational team, there's merit, right? Nobody's trying to create more work for themselves. There's merit to what they're doing. So if we open our ears and listen, oftentimes the answer is not exactly what they're doing, but directionally, to your point, I found that it's okay. Well, how do we use the technology now to get closer aligned with what you're doing? Because what you're doing makes sense. I mean, you're out here in the warehouse flinging product off the shelf 10, 12 hours a day. Trust me, if there's somebody who knows it, it's probably you. So that's my experience with it.
The opposite is also true, Bill, of every time we walk into the warehouse, we may field a question and it's like, I don't even understand why you're asking me that question because that's not something that we're supposed to be doing, right? So the second example, the second example, I'll just briefly talk about it, is the custom. I did a presentation on this early in November for the Itopia user group. The customizations that are available for workflows and providing the information and sort of, I'll just say, electronically driving traffic, right? So giving operators, if I scan a location and it's wrong, the box turns red, right? They're not allowed to enter incorrect information into the workflow screens so that I know from an administrator standpoint that what's going on in the warehouse in terms of picking and the operation, I know what resources they're using and I know what information they're entering. So as long as I can align the screens to what I'm expecting and what I need to happen out of the operation, it's very beneficial.
It adds security, it adds control, it adds accuracy.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, boy, that's great. Okay, so we've had perspectives from both the supply chain side of the house and the technical side of the house. So David, that being the case, I'm wondering where do you see any potential challenges that might arise when you're employing a tool of this kind?
Well, there's a couple of things. It's the tools are very robust,
Mhm.
and you can actually get do a lot with it, but you have to understand what it does. You have to know the software, you know, uh, have a deep understanding of its capabilities to really take advantage of it. And sometimes what happens is, uh, you might have this great tool, like maybe you bought like a fantastic saw or woodworking tool, and then you never really use it because you never really learn how to use it.
Right.
And that's I would say is probably one of the biggest challenges is taking the time to understand the system, taking the time to learn it, taking the time to talk to your peers, taking the time to talk to the vendor, and really seeing how you can use it because you don't want to put it to waste. So that's the thing. It could off the bat it could be a little bit intimidating. So you really have to kind of embrace it. But once you do, everybody I talk to, kind of becomes an evangelist for it because they really enjoy, like Bill was saying, it's fun. Like it really gets fun after all when you can actually go in there and start to do things and see the changes. So I think that would be probably one of the biggest challenges is uh taking the plunge, doing the deep dive and getting to understand it and use it, because once you do, it only gets easier from there.
When you're hiring staff, like again, like we said before, you're not necessarily looking for experienced coders, but you're looking for some level of skill and ability to adapt to this system. I mean, there is some onboarding involved, is there not, in learning how to use it, right, David?
Yes, definitely. So there, you have to be trained on it. It's not something that you'll just know off the bat.
Right.
But you would want someone who understands the operation, someone who's technical, but you don't need a program. You want someone who's curious and who wants to be able to solve problems. I think that's a big piece of it. Is if you love solving problems, if you love solving complexity, uh, that's kind of the best profile for someone who wants to really be a citizen developer.
Which sounds to me like a profile for anybody in supply chain these days. You'd better love solving problems and complexity because that's the very nature of supply chain management and all its manifestations. So that's great. Again, though, Ben, you're on the supply chain side, but you also own the development part. But if you're not the one doing the development, how then does that work?
I will say, so David brought something up about the skill set required to be a low code citizen developer.
Hmm.
There is a certain level of responsibility that is understood, and there's still a skill set required to dive into the application and get the most out of it. So understanding that if you make a change, the warehouse workflows that we use process millions of picks. Literally, the screen that I've developed using Tecsys is responsible for getting millions of things out the door of our warehouses. So understanding that there's a certain level of responsibility there, right? Where I can't just make a change because it impacts everybody who uses those resources, right? So famously or infamously rather amongst our team, the first week that I started, they gave me access to a development environment and said, yeah, we want you to figure out how to use this Itopia stuff and get good at it. Within like 2 or 3 days, I had crashed the test environment and we had to call Tecsys to have them turn it back on. So it was, there is a certain level of responsibility and skill set required.
Mhm.
To answer your question, Bill, or Bob, excuse me, about what would happen if I wasn't doing the development, I think more or less your speed to solution goes down. Right. So if,
Yeah.
as I mentioned, walking out on the warehouse floor and receiving feedback from the operation, right? Like, not to say that all feedback from the operation is bad, right? There are very good ideas that come from the boots on the ground folks. So there's an opportunity for me to get feedback from them on a business problem that they're trying to solve, and the speed to the solution where that problem is no longer a problem. I'm saying if I have to hand that off to another team that's not familiar with my operation, their skill set is way far and above what is required of a low citizen, a low code developer, right? Like, I think that the ability to speed up the implementation of some of those solutions would probably decrease.
But Bill, you're a consultant and a system integrator on your side, which means you don't necessarily have boots on the ground the way that Ben does. That being the case, share with us, please, some of your best practices that you might recommend.
Yeah, so great question, and I'm sorry, the smirk that's on my face is all I can think, Ben, as you know, we do similar things, for albeit through a different lens and from a different point. And hopefully, Bob, I don't get you guys in trouble and get you a trademark infringement here, but with great power comes great responsibility. So apologies if Spider-Man gives you a lawsuit on me saying that, but right, that's all I can think of every time I think about, you know, what you can do here, right? So you can do so many cool things. To answer your question though, Bob, we actually start by putting boots on the ground, which I'll tell you from a warehouse perspective, you simply can't start from another point. You have to recognize that this is a very physical environment that this software is accommodating, and you have to start with understanding what's physically occurring before you make any decisions. That said, once you've done that evaluation and go into it, the first thing I'd say is don't reinvent the wheel, right? That's one of the things we always look for, right? There's some amazing organizations or structures out there. Tecsys has a user community that's really propped up recently in the last year and a half, David, on the Itopia. Okay. That's a great forum to vet some of your concerns or some of the things you're trying to solve for that may have already been solved, right? There's some standalone groups. I think there's a Tecsys user group that's still out there and being ran. I don't know who runs that now. So if somebody knows, they can throw that out. But again, a great community that you can put that through. The other thing is look at the roadmap, right? With Tecsys now being a mainline product and every 3 months getting a new feature, or sorry, a new release, sometimes features included, oftentimes what you might be solving for may already be on that roadmap and being solved. So assuming that that's the case and you're not reinventing the wheel, the one thing that I found that's a shortcoming time and time again is document, test. Ben just brought it up, you know, go to the test environment, throw the kitchen sink at it, see if you can break it, because I guarantee you, if you can, the warehouse team is going to as well. You know, when you're looking at building it, build expansion into the solution. Great example there in the warehouse environment. We may not be dealing with lot codes or package codes. I'm speaking some specific fields for Tecsys on the package code field, but lot code should be for all warehouses. If you're not using it, that's fine. But if the customization you're putting in is interfering with tables or interacting with tables that's using those columns, consider that. And what does the solution need to look like to encompass that? That way, 2 years from now, if you start using lot tracking, you won't put yourself in bind. The last thing I'll throw out as a good general rule, it's easy to hard code some values into the solution. That makes getting the solution in place quicker. Consider variables again, and I mean that in the sense of coding, right? If you can build the variables into your solution, you make it much more dynamic for here and now, and again, future-proofing the solution you're putting in versus having to say, okay, 2 years from now, come back to this hard-coded entry and convert it somehow to some other version. So those are some of the general rules that we put in place as we try to deploy any development for our client community.
David, did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, so I just, I should have said this earlier, or mentioned it, is when Ben or Bill say Itopia, so Itopia is the name of our low-code application platform. I should have said that earlier, so if you mentioned it. And what Ben was saying when he did his presentation and what Bill just mentioned is, you know, we developed an Itopia user group. So it's basically an online community that can come together and learn from each other and learn from Tecsys to be able to use the system, you know, more effectively, you know, share knowledge, that kind of thing. So I just wanted to, in case the viewers weren't sure what we're talking about.
Okay, great. I'd like to bring the audience in at this point. We do have some audience questions for our panel, our citizen developers, as well as for David. And even as we are answering these questions, I encourage the audience to continue to submit your questions to the Q&A panel icon at the bottom of your screen, and we will get to as many of your questions as we can time permitting. Okay, so this question comes in. It says, for the DoD, I take it that's Department of Defense, is it? They need to use disconnected solutions. This was mentioned earlier. Can Tecsys provide a disconnected WES, warehouse execution system, or a warehouse management function for environments like on a Navy ship or a forward operating base? Can it batch update to an ERP like, like an SAP-based system, or is it only Texas to Texas? What do you think, David? Can you approach?
Yeah, so I'll try, and I know Bill is a former Marine, I believe, so maybe he can jump in, but I'll start.
Yeah, I get that feeling from looking at Bill's wall. So go on. I'm sorry.
But from a technical perspective, a WMS, there's ERPs that have WMS functionality, and there are WMS standalone. And of course, a WMS can pretty much integrate to any ERP. That's pretty much the name of the game. You would want a WMS that sits outside of the ERP because a WMS that's built within an ERP is usually good enough, but it might not meet all your requirements or all your needs. And it likely won't have local development capabilities as well. So the answer to that is, it's a SaaS platform. There's no servers, going to be sitting on the ship. So it's completely SaaS. And yes, it integrates, whether it's an SAP ERP or any other ERP, it integrates to it, through APIs or through coded integration.
Okay, thanks for that. This question is asking basically just for a little clarification, asking if a low-code application platform is extra to the WMS, to the warehouse management system. David?
Yeah, so in the case of Tecsys and the platform that we call Itopia, it's basically embedded. It's an embedded system, so you don't pay extra for it. You don't do anything extra for it. There are external or third-party or standalone local application platform. Those would cost extra. So if you happen to have one, you would be paying a subscription fee for that. And then also you would have, if there's any, the APIs and the integration is also kind of a big deal when you do that as well.
Thank you. Maybe this one for Ben. What is your method for coming up with new warehouse processes that will be supported by low-code development? How do you go about doing that, Ben?
So a couple ways, right? So one of the ways, like I had mentioned earlier, looking at the processes and what we're doing today, trying to digitize them, modernize them so that they're quicker, faster, and better than what we were doing before, right? So the example of the container solution was kind of easy because it was almost a time hindrance, operational efficiency, things taking longer in the warehouse than they should, right? Basically having a full FTE standing there printing totes and labeling them and making sure that, matching up. Things that you can see with your eyes like that are low-hanging fruit, right? There's other things that we get, right? Understanding from the operation, they have a fire hose, right? So if you walk into the operation, if you were just to throw that question out there, how could I make your lives better? You're going to get 100 different answers, right? About, why I would appreciate if the picking workflow had this, when I'm doing receiving, could you change this or could you tweak this field a little bit? That feedback is unsolicited and we get it quite often. A lot of the work that we do as well is providing the operations managers and the operations teams, like supervisors and staff, giving them the ability to visually see the data that they need. So one of our warehouse managers down in Florida, he said, and I'll never forget it, he said, I can't hit what I can't see, right? So if you give me the ability to see the problems that are going on in my warehouse, either with the in-house Cognos tool or with an Itopia dashboard or something like that, I can take actions on things that I can see, right? So if I can't hit it, or if I can't see it, I can't hit it type of thing. So those are basically two ways. There's no shortage of things that we'd like to improve or processes that we'd like to tighten up.
Great. Bill, maybe this one for you. How long does it take you to do low-code development for new processes?
Yeah, so I'll start with what Ben ended on, the speed to information type solutions, maybe an expression column as an example. Something like that could be as simple as a day, right? Just and I was smiling when you were walking through that, because all I can think of is all the times that, man, I sit here and I do this and I go to these three screens. It'd be nice if it was right here. And those are for us as citizen developers. Those are the ones that you can't help but smirk, get a little bit of pep in your step from, because it's nice to get that solution to the operation quickly. So something like that could be as simple as a day. We've had some. I mentioned that container auditing one that we did with a client, and that was actually kind of a prototype. We feel like directionally this is what we want, but we're not sure yet. So it was a lot of back and forth testing, regression testing, make changes, regression testing. Something like that could take weeks, right? If you're developing the requirements as you're developing the solution, obviously that takes a little bit longer. So it really just depends on the complexity and how well defined the business requirements are on how soon you can get it promoted to a production environment.
If I
There's
could
a lot of talk. I'm going to say, go ahead, please.
I was just going to say, if I could piggyback off of what Bill said, I think that
Sure.
for some of the citizen developer things, the communication and the planning takes longer than the actual development, right? So if we have a solution that I could, take a custom column and allow the operation to start plugging data into it, communicating with everybody what's happening often takes longer than me creating the expression column to populate that information into a workflow.
Thank you. With all the talk during this last hour about the ability to customize the various software solutions to the point where they're unique to each of the users, does it create any issues for Tecsys when it comes to upgrades? David?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And an important point is that and I'm going to answer it the long way, but the answer is no, it's no, I won't answer it the long way. The answer is no, it's not an issue. When you do modifications to a software, you're stuck in that software. You're stuck in that point in time, and to upgrade it is a lot of work because you've changed the source code. When you do customizations through Itopia, for example, through the local application platform, they're upgradable. They're preserved. So that's a big selling point. I wouldn't say just for the software in general, but as a supply chain professional, if you want to keep getting those upgrades through those releases, new features, new functions, 4 times a year, greater security, whatever the upgrade brings, you have that plus the customizations, as opposed to modifying the software and then getting stuck in there. And to upgrade is a much bigger, and I'm sure that the viewers have experienced this, a much bigger job to upgrade from a software that's been modified versus a software that can be upgraded easily.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we have a question here. It says, one of the great strengths for low-code solutions is the ability to address the client's customer's requirements. It allows you to apply a process as it is only inserted into the process for certain situations triggered by the criteria of the client's requirements, thus collecting or labeling only for certain customers. David, this questioner asks, can you elaborate more on the applying of the low-code criteria into normal process operations?
Well, what I would say is there's a range or spectrum of what you can do with it. And as Bill was saying, it could take a day for a simple process change or UI change, or it could take longer. And that's the thing is, it really doesn't. It can be a normal process. It could be a regular process. It could be you want to completely change a process. You want to enhance a process. It really doesn't. It really doesn't matter. The system is there for you to be able to do it. Mm-hmm. So I would say the onus is more on the citizen developer and the operation to kind of figure out what they want to do. But the important thing to note is that it's not all deep changes that fundamentally might change a process. It could be something very simple that you just want to fix. For example, when I scan this barcode for this particular product. I want to send an email to a manager because this is a product that, for example, might have shrinkage. I don't know, something like that. Or when there's a threshold for cycle counts below a certain threshold, don't bother doing cycle count. There's simple things you can do, or there's elaborate things you can do. So it really depends on what you're looking for.
Okay, thank you. Well, this has been an eye-opening hour, especially for me, and I hope for our listeners and viewers as well. Some great information about the value of low-code platforms. However, we are just now about out of time, but we do have time for one final question. And I'm going to shoot it over to David. Here it is. How do I know if I need a low-code platform? And what should I be doing in order to make that determination?
Well, I'd say there's probably 2 or 3 things you should be looking at. Number one is, how dynamic is your supply chain? If your supply chain is constantly fluctuating, if it's evolving, if you need agility, then what I would say is you should probably look into a local application platform, WMS, because as you've heard from Ben and Bill, it enables you to make those changes, whether they're simple, quick changes or elaborate changes, customizations. So, look at how much agility do you need in your supply chain is what you should be looking at. The second one would be, do you have an IT team that can handle the amount of work that needs to be done to become agile? And if the answer is no, then looking into a local application platform with the ability for business users to make those changes can help, IT partner with IT, and someone else can kind of make those customizations to get the agility without having to put pressure on IT resources. And then finally, the third one I would say is, if you're looking for a WMS today and you need to, I would say is, don't look at what your current needs are, look at your future needs as well. Look at, because if you invest in something like this today, you'll have it for a much longer period of time. You have a much higher total TCO, a much lower TCO by investing in the ability to customize and scale the software, as opposed to getting something that meets your needs today, but having to rip and replace it, 3 years down the line.
Great. Well, again, I've learned an awful lot, and I hope our audience has too. Thank you so much, gentlemen. It's been a great panel, David Machito, Ben Sparks, and Bill Myers. I want to thank you, and I want to thank our audience too for your participation. Indeed, we have something for you here. If you are attending ProMat 2025 coming up soon, you can unlock the full potential of your visit there with Tecsys's enhanced VIP experience. This QR code takes you to a landing page that outlines all those experiences that Tecsys is offering on a complimentary basis at ProMat, including a workshop, luncheon, private demo, and opportunity to speak with a warehouse consultant. So take a shot of that. And if you don't have time to do that, don't worry about it. That will be sent to you as an attendee of this webinar when it's over, which unfortunately is right now. So thanks everybody again. It's been a great time. I really appreciate it. Thank you, audience. Everybody, have a great day.